Very special topic for me. As I indicated previously, I'm a Superior Court judge out of Clark County, Greg Gonzalez. Previously, I had a juvenile court docket, and I tried everything. I tried everything to reach those juveniles, either pre-adjudication or post-adjudication. I tried so hard, but I realized after a year plus that I didn't have enough tools in my toolkit to get to them. And I realized that I didn't get to understand the family background, the cultural competency. I didn't understand all of that at the time. And I finally realized after I got out of juvenile court that that's what it takes. So this morning, we have a panel. Number one, we have Monica Rodriguez. She is from the 2nd Judicial District in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She is the drug court coordinator for juvenile recovery. She's also the coordinator of the communication program. She has a passion for children. She's been involved in children for the last 11 years. It's fantastic that we have her here this morning. We also have Fernando Giraldo from Santa Cruz, California. He's the head of the probation department. During my attempt to educate myself, I came across a couple of conferences that he spoke at in Florida. And I realized, wow, I don't have anything in the toolkit that he has. So I started reading about it a little bit, and I understand a lot of the programs that he has implemented in Santa Cruz. Some of his programs have been followed nationwide. So he's a leader in juvenile justice reform. He's a leader in reaching out to ensure that the families of the juvenile offenders are brought into court to assist with the probation department. It is, again, our pleasure to have him here this morning. Judge Riquelme, I met Judge Riquelme a couple of years ago when she was appointed. She's very passionate about the rights of those that don't have a lot of representation, either in municipal courts, state courts. She's a former prosecutor, former public defender. More importantly, she speaks fluent Spanish. Absolutely fantastic that she speaks fluent Spanish and that she's on the bench. I like to get fun facts, but right now she's in the middle of a campaign, so I don't get much fun facts from her. So I welcome her this morning. She's a great judge. I had a chance to chat with her many times, and I look forward to her presentation. Judge Rogoff, a fun fact, he is number 5 in the state of Washington in tennis. He's an avid tennis player. Judge Rogoff and I had a chance to speak over the last 8 months about this program. I can assure you again that he is passionate about juvenile offenders. He's worked hard on this program. He's put it together with the help of our AOC coordinator. We're looking forward to a wonderful program. A fun fact about Fernando, he's involved in his daughter's soccer programs. He's the Vice President of Operations in Santa Cruz regarding soccer. Fun fact for Monica, she has her own radio show in Albuquerque, and it's about New Mexico music. So I welcome some of those questions toward and after the program. Again, thank you for bringing them today, and I hope the presentation goes really well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to start out with some very basics. I'm Judge Riquelme, and making sure I know where the screen is here. So first we're going to talk about what's happening in the courtroom, and then we're going to go more specifically to some other services that are provided and how we can make sure people have access to that. So I think most of us are aware that we need to have interpreters for people who speak languages other than English and spoken English, and to make sure that we're providing interpreters for those individuals. And when I was a criminal defense attorney, I would quite often ask my juries these questions, and I think it's important for all of us to think about it too. Who here speaks another language? And if you were in a country where they spoke that predominantly as the language, would you feel comfortable going to trial in that language without an interpreter? Would anyone raise your hand for that? So just because someone knows how to converse with someone in just a normal social setting, it doesn't mean that they're going to feel like they're understanding or communicating everything well enough to be in a courtroom setting, where obviously there's some very important decisions that are being made about people's lives. So interpreting is a combination of 4 skills. It's language, legal terminology and procedure, professional responsibility standards, and cognitive interpreting skills. And we'll go through an exercise that some of you might have done before, but it's important to highlight some of those with this. Something that is interesting about interpreting is that with these exercises, we're just going to run them in English, but that's just English to English. And the interpreters are also trying to understand the context of what we're saying to turn it into the other language. It's not just like hitting Google Translate and cranking out an exact interpretation, that it actually requires a lot more skill than that. So at first, I want you, a couple of you are just sitting at your own tables by yourselves, but I want to make sure everyone can pair up with someone else for the second exercise. So it might make sense just to move next to a partner now, so while we're doing these exercises. The first one is a simultaneous interpreting exercise. To get an idea of what skills are involved so that we as judicial officers are more sensitive to the strain that we're putting upon the interpreters and the high level of skill that's involved there. So the first exercise is one where you'll get a feel for what simultaneous interpreting is. And I think most of us prefer simultaneous interpreting. It's faster. It's where the interpreter is pretty much keeping up with what we're doing in the courtroom, and it doesn't require as many delays for anyone. But it also involves a lot of skill. So what I'm going to do is to read a paragraph to you in English, and I will project as loudly as possible, and I will keep my pace relatively slow, slower than what we would probably have in a lot of courtroom situations. After I've said about 4 or 5 words, then I want you to start repeating what I just said 4 or 5 minutes ago and to try to keep up with what we're saying. So I want everyone to jump in and to try to shadow this and keep your voices at a lower level because the room might get a little noisy, although we're not packed, but just keep your voices a little bit lower so that you're just doing this for your benefit and for someone else to hear and understand you. You're not doing this for your partner, this is just for your own. And so this will give you a feel for what it's like to do simultaneous interpreting. So does anyone have any questions about what I'm asking you to do?
Keep up.
So, but not too much, because you have to play 4 or 5 words, because if you were an interpreter, you would need to have an idea of what the context was. So you can't, it's not a word for word, you have to give a little bit of a lag. All right. Scientists find the markers in a DNA sample by designing small pieces of DNA probes that will each seek out and bind to a complementary DNA sequence in the sample. A series of probes bound to a DNA sample creates a distinctive pattern for an individual. Forensic scientists compare these DNA profiles to determine whether the suspect's sample matches the evidence sample. A marker by itself usually is not unique to an individual. If, however, 2 DNA samples are alike at 4 or 5 regions, odds are great that the samples are from the same person. Are you guys doing? I see some head shaking in the back. So, how did you feel about this? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Do you feel like you did a good job, that you got it all?
It's a solid D minus.
A solid D minus? Maybe. And that was English to English.
Correct.
Good job. So, did anyone feel like you were able to keep up? So, and that's just without even having to go through that mental exercise of turning it from one language into another. Yes, did you have a question?
No, I just had a comment that when you do that, you actually, at least my brain, has to separate out really the meaning. I'm just following along and doing the repetition, so it's maybe ultimately I could do that, but my initial reaction was, I don't really understand what you told me, but I repeated it. So,
Right.
So it's quite a skill to develop.
Right, because when we're running this exercise and we're just parroting what's been said, our brains don't even have to think about what these words mean. We're just trying to regurgitate them. But an interpreter actually has to be paying attention to what the words mean, otherwise the interpretation isn't going to come out right. So did you feel like you were trying to sneak up and try to get up ahead of the 4 to 5 word lag, or were you just so far behind that it felt hopeless?
I kept missing, I was okay for about the first phrase, and then I lost some words, and then I'd want to jump in too soon, then I'd try to wait for the 4 or 5 words, and then I'd be good for the beginning, and then I kept dropping words. So I would say I probably parroted maybe half or 2/3, but I'm not sure, because I just knew I didn't have them. I wasn't sure what I didn't have.
Right, so if you were in the courtroom and you were the person on the other end of the interpreting, either you were the judge listening to that coming from the other language into English, or you were the person on the other end, it would have been a total mess. So it's really quite a skill, and I'm sure you can imagine that to keep that up for long periods of time would be pretty challenging, which is one of the reasons why a best practice is to have team interpreting for longer hearings or trials. So I'll pass it out to Judge Rogoff for the next one.
Okay, so the next exercise we're going to try, we do need you to pair up. So I want to see everyone in twos. And this will be an exercise on consecutive interpreting, which is also used in, I think, all of our courtrooms at one time or another. The idea here is that you're going to let the speaker go for a significant period of time. The speaker's going to stop, and then you are going to interpret what the speaker said. So you should have on your table a piece of paper titled Consecutive Interpreting Exercises. Does everyone have that? No? Here you go. I will pass them out. So for I want only one of your pair to actually look at that piece of paper. And the other, please don't. The way that this exercise is going to work is that the speaker is going to choose paragraphs 1, 2, or 3, and you're going to read that paragraph in its entirety. After you're done, the interpreter can take notes while you're speaking. You can do whatever you need to do in order to remember what was said. And when the speaker is done, the interpreter will interpret what they just said, or say what they just said. Everyone follow that? I'm really bad at explaining. You good? Anyone not understand what we're doing? All right, so since this is an exercise that's going to be completely done by you and I don't have to do anything, which is the perfect kind of exercise for me, I'll just say go, and then you're off to the races. So whenever you're ready, go. All right, I'm going to interrupt everyone.
Actually, more so.
All right, I'll have everyone stop. I know some of you are in the middle of it. So maybe if someone can raise their hand and tell me how you felt about doing it this way as opposed to simultaneous. Any thoughts? Whether this was harder, easier, what was different about it?
I felt like it was easier to get a general impression and to understand more of what was said, but I thought it was harder to remember specific details, like what direction you turn, license plate.
Unimportant things like that.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
So I used to be
Judge Roger.
I used to be an interpreter, and one of the things that I noticed is that, oops, sorry. Because I remember the importance of the little details, I missed some of the other stuff that was maybe not the small details. And in my defense, I'm out of practice. I haven't done this in like 15 years. But I think that the important details a lot of times are the most important, because when you say, I don't remember, it goes to the credibility of the witness. And I focus too much on that during this exercise.
Any other ideas about this particular part of the exercise, the consecutive rather than simultaneous?
I thought it was interesting because Frank did an excellent job, almost shorthand, but the pieces he missed were the I don't remember, I think, all of the hesitation. And so his reporting out was much more authoritative. It was this and this and this and this, and not the hesitation. And so, and also the difference, I think, between the earlier exercise and this exercise is I think it provided more opportunity to have the context and the details, because you were kind of thinking about trying to remember it, not just words, but whole sort of thoughts.
I'll tell you a story that really brought home for me the importance of interpretation and how it works in the courtroom. Because, you know, when someone said, I can follow along, I can say the word, but the meaning doesn't always resonate as I'm doing the interpretation. I was an assistant U.S. attorney doing a big drug takedown case. So we had a lot of different defendants, and the case had begun with an informant, and the informant's name was Mandy. And in all the police reports, he was referred to as Mandy, and we got to trial. We got all the way to trial, past the grand jury, past everything. We got to trial on some of the other defendants in the case. And so Mandy was just referred to throughout the case. He was never a witness. He was never found after he'd given the information he gave, but he was always referred to. And his name was Mandy Boleen. And so this was how the agents knew him, and this is how we knew him and we referred to him. Two names, first name Mandy, second name Bolin, B-O-L-I-N. And that's how we went through the entire trial. And as the trial was going on, I realized that the interpreters were laughing at us during the trial. Like they giggled every time we said Mandy's name. And at some point, this dawned on me, and I went over, spoke to them, figuring they just thought I was so brilliant that it was, you know, interesting to listen to. But no, they told me, yeah, his name's not Mandy Boleen. That's not his name. And we're like, what are you talking about? It's in every police report. Mandy Boleen is a cartoon character. Yeah. And it's Spanish for Jabberjaw, which is the shark cartoon character. And they called him that because he liked to talk a lot, and that's what they referred to him as, not his name. So the idea that interpretation is much more than just repeating words and helping us kind of get what was being said, but really helping us understand exactly what was happening, really hit home. So, yes?
One thing that I would like to say that is the hardest thing for interpreters is we tend to use a lot of acronyms, and acronyms don't necessarily interpret for one. And second, if somebody's charged with VAXA and the interpreter says VAXA, it doesn't mean anything. So just be conscientious to avoid using acronyms as much as possible when you have an interpreter, and just use the entire, even though it takes longer, so that the interpreter can actually interpret the whole thing. And even if the interpreter knows what VAXA is, by the time they say violation of the Uniform Controlled Substances Act, if it's a simultaneous interpretation, the judge or the witness or the attorney is 5 seconds later.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Thank you. And so I'm just going to quickly touch upon where you can find the interpreters. And we have AOC certified and registered interpreters. So the preference is to first go with a certified or registered interpreter. And so there is a process that interpreters go through to make sure that they're qualified to interpret in court, and you can find them on the AOC website. And we have these bench cards, and there was a new one that just came out a couple of weeks ago for interpreting cases there are some languages that aren't on there for certified and registered interpreters, and so there's actually a process that you need to go through if there's an interpreter who isn't on one of those lists because the language isn't available in certified or registered interpreters. I think that's probably something that your administrators are working on in terms of getting the interpreters to court, but that's something that you or your courts should be aware of. And also just determining, does someone even need an interpreter in the first place? There are definitely some signs that you should be looking for. Typically, people who are in court are not, if they understand everything that's happening, they're not going to be really agreeable and nodding their heads all the time. So if you see someone who you think maybe English isn't their first language and they're being way more agreeable than an English speaker would be, that might be a little tip right there that the person isn't understanding what's happening and they're just kind of making their way through it. So, our job on the bench is to make sure that we're identifying and determining whether people need interpreters. And then there are some questions on the bench card for how you can communicate with someone if you suspect that they might need an interpreter to make sure that we're getting them connected with services. And that's not just a service for them, that's also a service for us. We need to make sure that we're understanding what people are saying. So it goes both ways. The interpreter isn't just so the person who's in front of us understands what's happening in the courtroom. We also need to know what they're saying because that's part of what the process is all about. So I'll pass this along. I think we're going to sit for the rest of it and we're going to pass it off a little bit back and forth.
Everyone can still hear me? So juvenile court is a unique place for interpreter issues. First of all, if you think about juvenile court, the main person that you're dealing with is a teenager. And for those of you who have or have had teenagers, speaking to them in your native language, whatever that might be, if they know that native language, is still an impossibility. And them comprehending what you're saying and being able to repeat it back to you remains an impossibility. Now overlay that with someone who's not a native speaker, and you have all kinds of issues in communicating with your juvenile respondent as a judge, and telling the things that they need to hear, they need to understand, and they need to retain. The other thing about juvenile court is that we have created so many alternatives and so many opportunities for our juvenile respondents to deal with their cases outside of the courtroom in rehabilitative ways, which is amazing and important. But keep in mind that they have got to continue to be able to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, how well they're doing it, if they are complying with the conditions of the diversion, if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing in probation. And some of that happens outside of your purview, away from your courtroom. And ensuring that your court provides that interpretation and that language proficiency to your respondent and their family is incredibly important. And that's the part that I have found in juvenile court has been the most tricky. And that is that you have this third party in the courtroom who's not a party to the case, but is required to be there or is asked to be there. And in a lot of cases, they are going to be responsible for making sure that the respondent complies with a lot of this stuff. 15-year-olds don't drive themselves places, usually, legally. But their parents do, their guardians do, their aunts and uncles do, and when they're in the courtroom and you are telling them what the conditions of probation are or what they're going to have to do in order to get their child to court or to anywhere else they're supposed to be, they need to understand it too. And so you've got a situation where the person who may be responsible for making sure this all happens the way it's supposed to is kind of not as engaged because they're not the focus of the hearing. They also don't speak English, so they're having trouble understanding. There may be cultural issues where being incredibly deferential to the court is the way it should happen, so there's going to be a lot of nodding and okay, that's fine, yep. Okay, thank you, Your Honor. And they have no comprehension of what's happening. So ensuring that there is comprehension, I think, is particularly important in juvenile court. Taking the time to confirm, not just by saying, do you understand, But by actually digging in and figuring out whether people are understanding what happened is incredibly important, particularly in juvenile court.
So some tips for managing interpreted hearings. If there's one takeaway, it's just slow things down. As you can see here with the exercise, interpreting is quite a skill, and then we have cultural issues that also come into play. You can't zip through it, and it's hard because you've got a busy docket. But when you see these cases come through, you just need to make sure that people are understanding. So that would be my number one takeaway for these types of hearings, is just recognize it's going to take longer, and you just need to slow it down. And even if you've got a great interpreter and they're doing simultaneous interpreting, just because the language is being conveyed, that doesn't mean that people are understanding exactly what you mean when you're telling them these things. And then, of course, like what the bench card is suggesting, and I think we have some of those available today, is just make sure that the person is understanding the interpreter. In Skagit County courts, we have people come through who speak Mixteco, and there are multiple dialects in Mixteco, and so people don't have, just because someone technically speaks that language, it doesn't mean that they're understanding what the interpreter is saying. And so I've had a number of people in the courtroom say, they're not from my village. I don't speak this dialect. And so you need to make sure that just because the interpreter is, their lips are moving as much as you think that they should be moving, and they say that they have these qualifications, if they don't seem to be understanding each other, then there's no point.
Slow down your plea colloquies, and don't use legal language. So I am always terrified that at some point, some plea colloquy I do in juvenile court is going to get overturned because I change the words. I use regular language. When I talk about the right to confront witnesses who testify against you, I will tell the kid, particularly if there's an interpreter involved. So what I mean is that the state, the other side, is going to bring witnesses who are going to come in, they're going to be put under oath, and they're going to say what they know about your case. And then your lawyer is going to have the chance to ask them really hard questions about what they know, whether they're telling the truth, and if they truly know what they say they know, or anything else that they think is important. Do you understand that? And just like breaking it down to normal English language instead of whatever's written on your plea colloquy form, I think is really important. And I know because I was, I've been a lawyer for a long time, that sometimes that language is not precise, and that may raise an issue at some point on appeal. But I will take the chance on, 5,000 kids coming through my courtroom and understanding the plea colloquy, and that one case perhaps getting overturned down the road because I said the wrong word. That's how I look at it, doing the colloquies with kids who have interpreters, particularly.
Well, and the interpreter is going to interpret at the same level of language that you're using. So just because they're standing there with the kid or the parent in court, it doesn't mean that they're taking your level of English down to their level of whatever language they speak. So you just need to be aware of that. And then we can move on to cultural awareness. So we touched on this earlier, but just being aware of where people come from. Do they come from a background where a person in a black robe sitting up at a higher level than them is going to be deferred to in a different way? Are they going to feel comfortable voicing their opinions? Are there issues with with male and female relationships potentially that are happening there that you might need to be aware of? So if there's a culture that you're having contact with and you just don't feel like you know a lot about, just do a little bit of research, not in an ex parte sort of way, but just to have an awareness. If there's a community within your larger community, go find out a little bit more, because these are people who are in your courtroom and you need to understand how to interact with them so that they're understanding what's happening.
Judge Lasnik, who's a federal judge in the Western District, talked about, he had a lot of kids in the 90s who were lost boys from the Sudan who would then come to the United States and would get themselves in trouble. And I just remember being really impressed that he had obviously done an incredible amount of reading about the situation that had happened there, what these kids had encountered when they came to the United States, just generally. And so when he talked at sentencing or at other hearings, he was culturally competent. He knew what he was talking about. He knew what he was dealing with. And it was always pretty impressive. Just an example.
And there's a website up there, and it's in the materials, and it's called fnomed.org. And so it's an example of a resource that you can use, even just a simple Google search and looking up something on Wikipedia just to have a basic understanding. If there's a language you've never heard of before, you might be curious about that. So, is there anything you wanted to add?
I think we're good. I don't want to take too much time away from our special guest, Monica and Fernando, and so we're going to turn it over to them.
Good, much better. Good morning. I'm Monica Rodriguez. I'm the Deputy CEO in Bernalillo County, that's Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our jurisdiction is delinquency, dependency, and civil commitments. We also are a JDI model site for Annie E. Casey. I also serve as the language access coordinator for the entire court. Some of you may know where Albuquerque, New Mexico is because of a series that Wikipedia cites, and I quote, as the greatest TV show ever, and that's Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is filmed in and around Albuquerque and is set in Albuquerque, but Albuquerque is also known for our beautiful Sandia Mountains, our high desert climate, and our beautiful sunsets. The anthropological record also tells us that New Mexico has been a trade route for thousands of years. There was people trading with Central and South America that lived in New Mexico in the year 1000. And then in the year 1598, Spanish colonists came through and they termed this route the Camino Real, or the King's Highway, the Royal Highway. This route basically sits along current-day I-25 and converges with Interstate 40 right in the middle of Albuquerque. So Albuquerque has visitors from all over the state, all over the country, and all over the world. So there's New Mexico, which shares borders with Oklahoma, Texas, Arizona, Utah, and Mexico. New Mexico is also home to 23 pueblos and reservations that have 8 distinctive languages: Dene, Ketis, Jicarilla Apache, Mescalero Apache, Tewa, Tiwa, Towa, and Zuni. Albuquerque is the largest metropolis in the state, so many of the rural communities, including the pueblos and reservations, come to Albuquerque looking for housing and looking for work. New Mexico's history and future is multilingual. Before the United States achieved independence, Spanish soldiers and colonists from Mexico had established settlements in the U.S. Southwest. And when Mexico ceded these lands to the U.S., an estimated 75,000 Spanish-speaking people lived in the Southwest, 60,000 of whom were in New Mexico. Spanish was the dominant language, and a combination of Spanish, Mexican, and Indian culture dominated the region and the lifestyle. During New Mexico's march to statehood, the territory mandated and maintained multilingual practices. The courts and the legislatures were conducted through interpreters. New Mexico statutes were published in 2 languages, and Spanish-speaking New Mexicans would not consent to lose the right to serve on juries. New Mexico has codified this into law. There are several laws that speak to this, but specifically, the Deaf Interpreter Act and the Court Interpreter Act clearly delineate the responsibilities of the court to provide credentialed court interpreters. Also, the New Mexico State Constitution cites that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall have the right to have the charge and testimony interpreted to him in a language that he understands. New Mexico also has the unique distinction of being the only state in the union where limited English proficient citizens have the constitutional right and obligation to serve on juries. Bernalillo County, the county that Albuquerque sits in, is very multilingual. Over a quarter of its residents speak Spanish, and approximately 30% speak some other language, including Navajo, other Native American languages, Vietnamese, and Chinese. In order to address this, the AOC and basically the AOC and the Supreme Court mandated that court should put processes in place to meet the needs of limited English proficient families and visitors to the court. One of them is a language access plan. The others include interpreters in the courtroom, language access specialists outside the courtroom, and additional resources for LEP individuals, and I'll talk about that today. The first is the language access plan. The AOC and Supreme Court mandated that every court in the state would create a language access plan that was individual to each of those courts. It was convened with different classifications within that court, from court clerk to bailiff, all the way to deputy court executive officer. We did surveys of the community, stakeholders, and people that worked at limited English proficient individuals, of judges, and our staff, to get a baseline of their knowledge and what they knew about their obligation and responsibility to individuals that came to the court. It was created as a template for each court, and each court was able to fill in with each individual particular data, what resources they were offering to these individuals, and also the data and statistics that help build the plan itself. So it serves as an educational tool to communicate the legal basis for the court's compliance with state and federal law. It identifies the needs of each court. It publishes the steps taken by the court to ensure that LEP individuals have meaningful access to services both inside and outside the courtroom. It publishes statistics regarding court contacts with LEP individuals, and it's shared with the public and community stakeholders. But most importantly, it's a living, breathing document. It's updated annually based on these surveys, based on the statistics and the data that we pull, and judges and staff in the community are involved in creating the plan. Some of the statistics we keep and some of the ways that we ensure that interpreters meet individuals in the courtroom is we schedule dockets with interpreters automatically in this area where dockets are large and when there's short time frames for settings. We may not know that the limited English proficiency person needs an interpreter until the day of the hearing, so that's done automatically. We also flag our criminal cases at arraignment when an interpreter is needed. Attorneys or LEPs may request an interpreter via phone, via email, or via the court's website. Our detention intake form notes when an interpreter is needed. And our self-help domestic violence petition form asks about the need for interpreters. So basically, at every avenue that we have contact with the LEP individual, we're trying to gather that information. And anyone in the court that has access to our case management system can flag that case so that subsequent hearings already have it noted that there is a Spanish interpreter required or an interpreter that's required in that hearing. Some of the data from FY17, we had over 3,400 Spanish interpreters in the courtroom. Rounding up the top 5 were ESL, Vietnamese, Arabic, and Navajo. Another innovative way we've met the diversity of the languages spoken in our court and the visitors to our court is by utilizing language access specialists. Language access specialists are bilingual employees of the judiciary who are certified and who can translate basically as part of their job. They have a 12-week certification process that's managed through the New Mexico Center for Language Access. The course is self-directed. It's in an online format, so people in Deming, New Mexico, which is about 3 hours away from Albuquerque, don't have to drive. They can do it at their own pace, and it's universal, so everybody's getting the same training at the same time. And the training is specifically geared to allow people to do their same functions in a second language. In 2018, we've had 2,300 contacts already with visitors to the court and a language access specialist, and I'm sure that we will surpass our numbers from 2016 this year. We have 15 language access specialists certified in Spanish in our court. Throughout the years, we've had other languages, including Navajo. Some of the advantages for having a language access specialist is compliance with federal and state law. It expedites the court process. It reduces costs by utilizing bilingual personnel and staff, and of course, improve language access services. Some of the advantages for the employee include certification from the New Mexico Judiciary, and certified language access specialist employees can request from the administrative authority to to have $1 an hour extra added to their salary. Other resources that we offer throughout the court for outside the courtroom are I Speak cards in over 60 languages. These are no cost, low cost. We've also copied them and put them on our website so employees can look up languages for the persons that are in front of them. We have multilingual signage throughout the courtroom. We have telephonic interpreting services. And something that doesn't cost any money at all, we have Spanish and English menu so that callers to the court can choose which language they want to communicate in. Callers may speak either through an LES or through the CLI. The video that are shown to you in our detention center is bilingual, it's both in Spanish and English. Our court also holds 12 legal fairs each year. We call it the Lollapalooza. At this fair, there is free legal advice provided by judges, volunteer attorneys, and court staff, and there's always an interpreter or a language access specialist on site. The court also offers Spanish languages services such as family counseling. So we have a counselor that does all of their sessions in Spanish, court clinic, family visitation matters, and mediations held regarding child welfare proceedings. These resources are shared with the community, posted on the court's website, and the court's website is available in Spanish. This is an example of one of the signs that's required to be hung in our courtroom. It basically tells visitors that they're entitled to an interpreter. They have a right to an interpreter. It's in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Navajo. But probably what I'm most proud of and what has the most impact on the visitors to our court is that our bench reflects the community. That's both in gender, in race, and in language proficiency in another language. 4 out of our 6 judges or judicial officers speak Spanish either very well or to complete fluency. You might also recognize Judge John Romero. He is currently the president of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. He spends a lot of time in the community, as well as presiding Judge Murray Ward. They often go to a place that houses our community custody program in the South Valley that is notorious for its high rates of poverty and where a lot of the children that come before the judges reside in. They'll share a meal there and they'll spend time there with that community, getting to know them. Just last week, Judge Ward was involved in some meetings discussing the conditions of confinement at our Youth Services Center. So what are the big takeaways? Community partners are extremely important. Create a stakeholders directory, know who is serving the people in your community and who may know what the obstacles to these individuals are when they visit your court, as well as the resources. They may know more about the visitors' needs than the court does itself. Data is extremely important. Keep data on all the contacts that come into the court, know who's visiting your court, and use that data to train to the data and also to share with the community. Do surveys to find out more about who you're serving. Survey your judges, survey your staff, survey the community. Get a baseline of what their knowledge is of the responsibilities and obligations to language access individuals, limited English proficiency individuals, and then train to that data, to that information. Bernalillo County has implemented a new employee orientation that includes a module on language access, and every single employee in the court has had to take that training, including judges. And last but not least, create a language access plan. It's a good vehicle for understanding your visitors as well as emphasizing to people that come into your court what resources you offer. It also gives you a good inside look into what's deficient and what obstacles there are to limited English proficient visitors to the court. Thank you.
If I could just jump in and ask you one question. Very early on, you indicated that in New Mexico, jurors have the right to sit on juries if English is not their first language, which is not the case necessarily in the state of Washington. So how do you make it happen? So if you have 4 people on your jury who speak different languages or they all speak Spanish, how are the interpreters provided? How does that work in the courtroom?
Sure. So, like anywhere, I'm sure interpreters are greatly needed in a small resource, but because of state law, it is required and those interpreters are brought in, regardless of the language that is spoken. A lot of times we'll use headsets so that the proceedings aren't too interrupted. Also gives some intimacy to the conversations that are going on. But there will be interpreters brought in for all of those proceedings. And I actually had a question that I hadn't really thought about from Catherine about how that happens during deliberations. And that's a really good question. I'm not sure. I haven't been privy to that. And a lot of times those deliberations can be chaotic, and it makes it difficult for an interpreter to deliver the message accurately. So I'm not too sure, but it does happen and it's required.
Justice Gonzalez has a question.
You mentioned language access plans. We have just updated our model language access plan. Do the appellate courts also have language access plans in your state or just the trial courts?
All courts in the state are mandated to have one, and what made it easy is the AOC actually contracted with someone to come into each court, and they came in with a template, and basically it was up to the committee that was convened to fill in the gaps of that template. Each of them, of course, individual. In the appellate court, we have some different issues than a magistrate court in the rural communities, but yes, they're all required.
I had a question about translation services that you provide. I had an LEP pro se litigant in a civil action come before me, and of course we would provide interpretation services, but he also asked for a translation of certain key docs which were before us: the trial briefs, the motions, the preliminary, the jury instructions, because it was a jury trial, before I tell you what we did, what do you do if you have a litigant ask for translation of certain documents? Is that covered in your LEP, I guess?
It is. We do have several of our documents, especially in the South arena and domestic relations and family court, that are translated already into the Spanish. We have an interpreter on site that can translate the document real time if needed. We also have the Language Access Center through the AOC that can translate with a little bit of time, or translate the document into whatever language is needed. And we have done it, we do it, and we do have Spanish documents available in several of our different jurisdictions.
Yeah, thank you. We did some of those things. I mean, some of the documents that they were asking for translation of weren't standard form documents. It wasn't a complaint, it wasn't things like that. It was the trial brief. And luckily we had enough time to get site translation services of that. Took the morning, got site translation of that. I wasn't sure that provided the same level of access that the English proficient person would have had. They were reacting to that in real time. But given our constraints, that's what we did. And then we declined to translate some documents, like the whole court record of the lower proceeding, which was also requested. But he had lived through with an interpreter, so we let that go. Anyway, it's something that we've been thinking about for our language access.
We struggle with it as well. We've been getting some initiatives to actually translate some of these documents and have them filed into the court record in a second language, because in the Missile Constitution that might be something that's required, but it's been a very uphill battle and creates all sorts of other issues, especially in the domestic violence realm, where some of those proceedings need to be turned over in a 24-hour period. How do you get an interpreter in to translate them back into English so that the judge can understand it and the rest of the parties can understand it? So it's an ongoing struggle, but we recognize that it's important. Got to figure out how to do it.
And one thing I would add also is that the person who's in front of you might not be literate in that language. So that's also something that you need to be aware of. Thank you.
Buenos días, es un placer estar aquí con ustedes hoy. Yo soy Fernando Giraldo, jefe de libertad condicional del Condado de Santa Cruz, California. I think you may have thought I was going to continue in Spanish, but that's fine probably for some of you. But it's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored. I'm the chief of probation in Santa Cruz County. I've worked for the department for the past 23 years, and I've had the honor to serve as chief for the past 5 years. I oversee the adult, juvenile, and juvenile hall, so 3 divisions, about 125 staff. And it's a big role, and of course the role as the leader, and as many of us are leaders here, is really to make sure that my staff are aligned with our vision and mission to promote public safety. And cultural competence, linguistic competence plays an important role in public safety, so that's why I'm here. I'm going to speak to you about the perspective of running a probation department, being a probation officer, and collaborating with a number of partners, including, of course, the courts. Obviously, I'm appointed by the judges in Santa Cruz. It's really particularly important today to be able to communicate and work with people from the community who are from vastly different backgrounds. And it's particularly important, I think, nowadays, as we have a lot of individuals and families that are really fearful of government for a variety of reasons, particularly those folks who are of documented status. So we've had the effects in our local communities. And so, of course, our goal as probation is to have families answer when we knock on the door, when we come to see them, or come to court, not fail to appear for court, and so on. So I'm going to talk to you about ways that we do that. Here's the little overview of my presentation. I'll start with the receptionist debate, which it's an interesting story. A few definitions. It's really important to give you, provide some demographics of our county, our department. Also, as well, as Monica, Santa Cruz County is also a model site for the NEKC Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. So who would know, you have two presenters from, I think, the counties that have done some historic things in the country, so it's pretty cool. I want to give you, of course, examples and results of why, if we are advancing racial equity and inclusion, what are the results for public safety and for the youth and families we serve. Talk about our recruitment efforts as well. So really, it's important to state why it's I have a huge passion for this topic of cultural and linguistic competency. First and foremost, I'm a second generation American. My parents are from Colombia, South America. They came here in the 60s, and I guess I was bilingual at birth because, banana, I know I had trouble with teachers would tell my parents, you need to learn to say it the right way. However, what a beautiful thing, right, to be able to speak two different languages and learn a lot more about people, culture that I was living in. But I also understood how folks, individuals may not have difficulty, especially as family members came to the United States later in age, learning the new language and really weren't as proficient as they wanted to be, despite really trying. It was a challenge for them. So that's sort of the why for me personally, why it's important to be not only linguistically but culturally responsive. When I started at probation 23 years ago, it was kind of frowned upon to speak Spanish in the hallways. There was only a few of us that spoke Spanish. And eventually I was the first Latino manager, the first chief, first department head in our county ever that's Latino. So I think we still have a ways to go. But when I started there, I just remember seeing, folks, the old guard saying, hey, we speak English here. What are you doing? I was like, okay, I'm sorry about that. But my management team had a vision at that point. They really wanted to be able to more appropriately serve the community that we were serving. So I was intentional, at least on their part, to bring me in and hire me and really move up through the ranks to expand our capacity to serve. So the receptionist debate really, it tells you how important it is to have a seat at the table, to have a diverse leadership, to have the voices that can understand where people are coming from different parts of the community. And it was about hiring whether or not we needed a Spanish-speaking receptionist in the juvenile hall. And the senior manager, actually, the superintendent of the juvenile hall said, I don't think we need one. They just don't ask a lot of questions. I see the interaction. They nod their heads, they don't say much, right? And I was just like, well, hold on, I know what's going on here. They don't ask questions, guess what? Because they can't speak the language. And so I just remember just thinking, what if I wasn't here? What would have happened? What if I didn't have a seat at the table? So that's just I'm sure you all have examples of that. But that's really, of course, at that point, I was like, wow, this is, we've got to change a few things here in our department, which we did. Oh, thank you. You bring that for me. I appreciate that. Okay. So let me just, I lead off with this flyer here for a few reasons, because it really, this soccer program that we run, one of our probation officers runs indoor and outdoor soccer teams, and it's a flyer for a recent 4th annual summer soccer camp. Of course, the flyers in Spanish, but it's really reflective of being responsive to many needs in our approach to transform the probation department and what we do. So it's an academy that really serves our most disadvantaged and vulnerable youth from a very impoverished part of the community, South County, Watsonville, California. But on multiple levels, it's really about providing trauma-informed, positive youth development type services. And these are youth ages 6 to 14 who normally wouldn't be able to afford a soccer program. But we enroll probation officers, volunteers, the community, the farm growers, et cetera, to support the program. It's had a really great success, and it's all done in Spanish. Most of the youth, while they speak English, they prefer to speak Spanish. That's the other thing that always, just because a person speaks 2 languages, they may have a preferred language. So ask what language they prefer to communicate in. So I just want to give you a couple important definitions. Really, what's cultural responsiveness? And I know there's a lot of different definitions. And we just had actually our entire management team spent a day through a training that was a training called Culturally Responsive Organizations. And so we all spent a day together doing a lot of interactive work and action planning. But cultural responsiveness really describes the capacity to respond to the needs of diverse communities. And it really, requires a lot of knowledge of different levels of the interventions. And then, of course, there's a cultural responsive organization, which I think is something that we should all strive for. And it's kind of the path towards mastery. So it's an organization that is on a path to improving and becoming hardwired to respond to the unique communities of color and service users of the communities of color. So I like that term, hardwired, because then you can just immediately, it's not like you have to stop and think about what you're doing, you can just naturally respond. So here's a little bit of demographics. I didn't bring the nice pictures of the ocean and stuff, but that's saying, we're a beach community. We're right on we're actually the smallest geographic community, square miles, second smallest in California. We have a population of about 270,000, 445 square miles. The big industry there is agriculture, tourism, government, part of the government, and then a lot of high tech. Of course, we're right next to Silicon Valley. But when you see agriculture, tourism, it should let you know, and I know there's a lot of farm workers here, migrant farm workers, very low paying industry, as well as a lot of folks work in the service industry as well. And we happen to live in the least affordable place in the United States. Only 12% of the residents can afford a home. The median cost of a home is currently at $900,000. So we're in a huge crisis. A lot of the Silicon millionaires and billionaires have bought up a lot of the ocean property, knock down houses, and just build mansions. But we are, and so it's important to know in terms of not just, that's part of just knowing the individuals that you're working with, not just, hey, they don't speak English, but what are the conditions they're living in, how many people are able to live in a single family home. And it's usually three families, and I'm talking about particularly in South County, the Latino families that we serve. So we've got a lot of huge issues in Santa Cruz. We're not diverse in the sense that I can think of LA like an urban environment with lots of different cultures and people of ethnic backgrounds. We pretty much are white or Latino. As you can see in the chart there, this is the overall demographic: 53% white, 36% Latino, small number of African Americans. So that's the population that I'm talking about. And our Latino population are first, second generation, third generation American, Chicano, a lot of Central Americans as well from El Salvador, Guatemala as well. So it gives you an idea. And one end of our county, Watsonville, is really, that's where a highly concentrated Latino population is. It's 85% Latino in that area. So this is a particular, I'm going to focus on juvenile side. We run adult services, but this is the court age population, which is a little different You see that 53% of the general population of court-age youth 10 to 17 in California is Latino. 75% of the youth on probation are Latino. So hopefully, and we ask ourselves this, of course, what the heck is going on? We've been asking that for years, but what can we do about it? What can we do as an organization? What can I do about that as a leader? It's very complex. So the question is, why are Latinos overrepresented in our caseloads? And then again, how do we best serve the youth and their families? So what we don't want to do is really adore and admire the problem. We have a problem. Across the country, every jurisdiction there's a lot fewer kids coming into juvenile detention facilities. Arrest rates are dropping in California. Crime rates are at historical lows. But what we've seen is the overrepresentation and the disparities have actually increased. So we've got a lot more to do. What we've done, one of the best ways to really reduce your overall caseloads is, of course, to use diversion to a great degree. And so just in the last, since 2011 to 2017, you can see our supervision caseloads have decreased by more than half. That's largely because we divert about 66% of our cases. We don't deal with status offenders or truancy or anything like that. We're reserving our services to the justice system for really what folks at high risk to recidivate, high risk to reoffend, and with lots of needs. So I believe that's what we're well equipped to serve. That in terms of smaller caseloads, of course, has resulted in a 65% drop in the use of juvenile detention, where our average daily population in 2017 was 17. And when I started in 1995, it was around 60. We had a 42-bed facility, so we had overcrowding problems, and chose to really heavily rely on alternatives in the community to instead of building another juvenile hall. So I wanted to give you an idea of just the overall demographics in the community. Thank you. I forget, I keep that in the back. I like that. Who we're serving. Well, why is that important? And it's really, I have 125 staff in the 3 divisions that I have. And I know the community demographics pretty well, and it's really intentional how we hire, how we recruit, and where we recruit from. We hire a lot of people that actually live in the community. Of our line staff, those are staff that actually have caseloads. We do community supervision, which are about 45. That doesn't include supervisors or managers. 46% of my staff are bilingual and bicultural. So where the units I place them in, and depends on where the high needs are. As you can see in the juvenile, we have 75% of the kids on probation are Latino youth. So that's how we're always looking at this, every few months. Where do we need to place people where they can work best with the community. In the juvenile division, we have 14 line staff probation officers. 10 of them are bilingual bicultural, which is about 71%. 75% are lines are Latino. Close to that, so maybe we'll have to do some rotations. Probably not, but really, we really closely scrutinize this information. Every time we hire somebody, where do we place them? What's the experience? Can they work? Because a lot of the work we do is no longer office visits. Come and wait. We'll sit and wait for you to come to the office. It's going out to the community, meeting them where they're at, non-traditional hours, and so on. So here's just an overall. I want to show you. This is part of. We also have our department's equal opportunity and cultural competency plan and standards of Latino accessibility. We actually also are required or accountable to report this information consistently. So, and this chart shows that overall, 67% of our probation staff who supervise individuals in the community are bilingual, bicultural. 44% of our client population is Latino. And the majority of the individuals we serve, if you're talking about on the juvenile side, the kids, they speak English. There's very few that we get that are monolingual, or a lot that prefer to speak Spanish. But it's the parents often, right, that are monolingual Spanish speaking. So that's where it's key. So we can't just say, oh, the kid speaks English, he's fine. We have to take a holistic approach to, and we need to know the family or whoever the primary caregiver, what is their language. So that's where, and we know we can't really change lives unless we're engaging the whole family system, or however you want to call that, people that are their support people. Just another chart, and this is just, case management system, always looking at this, just to look at what our caseloads, what are our caseloads like, how are we doing, particularly because of the work we've been doing for the last 2 decades to try to reduce the racial and ethnic disparities, which are particularly striking in the juvenile side. So this is why we're always looking at that, keeping an eye on the data. Of course, the challenge then, if I look at my staff, is how do I have a pipeline for those individuals, people of color, to move up through the ranks, and ultimately, like a lot of organizations, the same as happens in ours, where we have 12 managers and only 4 of us are who consider ourselves people of color. I have 2 African Americans and 2 Latinos on the management team, and everyone else is white. So this green color shows you the line staff percentage of people of color, but that goes down from line staff to the supervisor to the management level. So again, another not only looking externally at the population I serve, but internally, how do I create opportunities for my staff to move up in the organization, and equitable opportunities, because everyone needs different things to get where they need to be or should be. So I think the values that I inherited from the past leaders, which are excellent values, is that importance of constantly really looking at who you hire, how do they reflect the populations that were served, constantly messaging those values, the importance of really meeting our youth and families where they're at, both to our staff and our external stakeholders, of course, as well, our community partners, our district attorney, and so on. But a really constant review of our policies and practices through kind of the racial and ethnic lens. When we put together new programs or have a new policy, that's a lens that needs to be applied. There's a lot of tools out there that can help you do that. So you have to think about, if I do this, how will it affect that person? And then of course we look at the numbers and programs. So it's just very critical that, and for me, it's important that I consistently state the values of this organization. So I'm going to talk about creating success. But again, how does linguistic cultural competency play a role in public safety? Well, simple thing that we found out, and this is from a few years back, and I'll give you more recent examples, but we had a failure to appear problem. And I don't know if that's exists out here, and yeah, no, not at all, yeah, but particularly higher rate of failure to appear for Latino families in particular part of the county. We sort of scratched our head, wow, what's going on? And of course, did both qualitative and quantitative analysis, discovered that we weren't really doing court notifications, and if we did, it really wasn't in the language that the families preferred. Simple little study. Then, of course, our response was, and this was before the court notification automatic systems you have now text you. Then we had a team in our alternative detention unit that did daily court reminders, and we made sure they were bilingual and bicultural, and right away our failures to appear for court dropped for the youth. So that's just a basic example, and that's public safety. You want your individuals to show for court, especially failure to appear warrants for non-serious new offenses. You want to avoid that to the extent possible. So that's one little example. So here's another up-to-date example, and this really relates to out-of-home placement. So these are youth that are court-ordered out of the home and into a continuum of either group homes, ranch camps, or even the state commitment facility. Very few go to ranch camps or state commitment, but group homes can be utilized. And as a department, we've always had a lot of alternatives to group homes because we believe youth are best served in their in the context of their families, the people that care for them and support them, but how can we provide them those supports? But what we saw was 80 to 90% of all youth removed from their homes were Latino. So 80 to 90%. So I challenged our team to do something about this, and it was a perfect opportunity to look at this because they were about to start a year-long results-based leadership. It's called RBL training through the Annie Casey Foundation. And they had to, this program is to accelerate results, really to be action-oriented, use data, and really make critical changes to the system. So this was a perfect time. So they started the program in 2017. So the project really became they didn't let me participate because I guess maybe feel uncomfortable if the boss was there. So, but this is what my juvenile team focused on. And really, again, I was really supportive of this thing, this project, results-based leadership, because we had our placement numbers started skyrocketing again. About 4 years ago, we dropped to about, on average 10 youth in out-of-home placement per month, gone down from 20, and then it started creeping up again. And then we had a new judge on the bench, and sometimes things change. But our judge also had lost confidence in one of our alternative to detention programs and wraparound program. Really wasn't happy with it, but a lot of it had to do around our providers, particular behavioral health providers, struggling to hire bilingual, bicultural staff. So, and really that they just couldn't engage families, and the result, and a number of other things. I think there's probably some bias in terms of how we saw families that was leading to an increase in these numbers. So what we had to do was really the challenge was for our program was we had the data, we knew our placement numbers were skyrocketing, we knew that a majority of youth being removed from the homes were Latino, so we had to challenge the system. Of course, one of the things we decided to go with another provider, went from government to non-government, which are more flexible, started providing 24-hour weekend response, worked on weekends. The unions didn't want to work on weekends, so but our providers were willing to do that. It was a big difference. And we really challenged our prosecutor and our judges a little bit, but also offered them this new program that I'll talk about, this new model that was specific around providing services, culturally competent services for Latino youth who are struggling with behavioral health issues. Some of the other things that we needed to do, however, were look at the bias that we saw. So bias you see up there, farm worker families unable to supervise youth, right? Especially during season, that's a bias. It's challenging for them. But one of the things they did, well, how do we engage the extended family to provide supervision for the youth and support for families? So that's how we challenged that bias, and that was an adaptive change we made. Another bias, you'll often hear, we've exhausted all options. We've been through this, probation, court, so many times out-of-home placement is the only option. Well, again, how do we expand capacity to do family engagement and really work with find out what other systems this family and youth are working with. Another bias, disengaged families. They're resistant, uncooperative. So why would we want to try to work with them? But that's not true. Really, how do you find the right staff that can engage with them, that can use motivational interview, that can communicate with them, maybe look like them, understand, come from the same communities? That really did a lot. So those are some of the biases that we had to I'm going to skip this slide. So I'll talk about in the last couple minutes the solution that we had was developing the Fuerte program, which is the Familias Unidas en Tranquilidad y Respeto y Esperanza program. So it's really designed to work with Latino youth and families for at-risk or out-of-home placement, but particularly with behavioral health needs. And again, I told you the need. We had this 90% of the youth were Latino youth that were being removed from the home. There was a lot of barriers to working with our partners at behavioral health because they just couldn't hire bilingual, bicultural staff. So we went with a community-based organization. But they were able to really, and they were able to hire the community-based organization, actually clinical staff, licensed clinical staff, and I'll show you the photo of the team right here. 100% bilingual, bicultural team. Esther, PhD, she's the program manager. Jesus Madrigal, ASW, he's the clinician. Liliana Gonzalez, she's now a probation officer. We do still a lot of staff from community-based agencies, and so I'm happy to have on our team. And there's our probation officer, Cesar Estrada. And so the difference is shocking what the results were in dropping our out-of-home placement rates. New placement orders dropped by 42% from 2015, where it was 26, down to 15 in 2017. Today we have 3 youth in out-of-home placement today. And actually, if we move to today, we've dropped the average new placement orders is down to 10. So we've really, this program has just been a tremendous success, but I really attribute that to really being culturally and linguistic responsive to those special behavioral health needs of youth, particularly in the south of our county. So let me tell you something that we're doing right now, and maybe you've heard about it. It's a 21-day equity habit challenge that's going on throughout the country with like about 600 individuals across numerous sites, and probably in Albuquerque as well, I'm sure. And it's really, this challenge is a equity habit building challenge originally developed by Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. and Debbie Irvine. And the team was designed to really modify the challenge for justice stakeholders who are invested and they have a vested interest in the future. But really, we're looking about the issues of power, privilege, oppression, and equity. And so every day, people are asked to read an article and it's specified what to read, or watch a video and then reflect on it. And it's all done online. It's been pretty remarkable to have that many people. So that's sort of the next thing that my organization and a number of others across the country are doing. So with that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you.
Any questions?
There was something that I was thinking about, I'm curious how you're dealing with that in the juvenile probation context, but you mentioned that there are a lot of kids who might speak Spanish as their language at home, but they can speak English very well, and so they don't necessarily need someone to speak Spanish with them in the juvenile probation officer, but their parents are monolingual Spanish speakers. And what I noticed when I was representing, when I was working as a public defender, and I see it now in court, is that there's a power dynamic that shifts. That because normally, if you're in, most of us, we grow up and you speak the same language as your parents and people around you, and your parents are the ones in charge. But that shifts at a much earlier age for these kids because they're actually the ones who are the conduit for the information of the broader society. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a really dangerous practice, having the kids translate. If you're a probation officer and then you have a parent who's monolingual with a kid who speaks Spanish and an officer who doesn't, you do not want to have that officer tell the kid, tell your parent this, because you don't know what they're going to tell them, right? I would if I was a kid, like, right? Hey, it's okay, you don't need to go to school. Do drugs all you want. I mean, I don't know. But, so we've fortunately, most of our staff on the juvenile side particularly are Spanish speakers, a lot of them. So we're fortunate in that way that we recruited them. And so when they do an office visit, they can speak Spanish. So they'll do it in Spanish, or they might talk to the kid in English, and they'll do that simultaneous thing, okay, you really need to stay away from that group of kids. Oiga, le dije a su hijo que no debe estar con esas personas, después de esta hora o en esa calle. So that's a typical scenario in our probation department, just talking about, but not having that child translate for the probation officer to the parent, because that'll be misinformation for sure. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I think that's something that we need to be aware of in court too. you know, the parents are there for a reason, and so we need to make sure that the parents are understanding what's happening, because the kids might walk away from the hearing and tell them a completely different story about what the judge just told everyone.